It's 5:05 and welcome into a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Following his announcement Friday, we talked about it yesterday, of $30 million worth of small business grants for businesses affected in western North Carolina by Hurricane Helene, Democrat Governor Josh Stein is requesting over $1 billion in immediate funding from the North Carolina General Assembly. He did that yesterday, and he claims it's to support urgent rebuilding needs in that part of the state. Stein said in a press release that the funds would be used to strengthen the economy, get people back in their homes faster, repair various forms of infrastructure, whether we're talking water, sewer, electrical, as well as supporting farmers, fixing private roads and bridges, removing debris, and helping school children stay at grade level. The governor had this to say yesterday, quote, "The people of western North Carolina have suffered tremendously since Helene swept through. I appreciate what the General Assembly has done so far, but it's time for us to step up and get them the money they need right now to rebuild. We can't forget western North Carolina, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that the state shows up for them." Stein says that they don't want to wait for a budget to be finalized in June or July. That's typically when that process happens, to get that requested money out the door for immediate needs. He said while it is too early to understand the full economic impact of Helene, hotels like those in Buncombe County can give a little bit of an indication. Hotel occupancies were down 74% in October, 57% in November compared to where those numbers were 2 years ago prior to Helene. He said, quote, "What we know is that after a major disaster, 43% of small businesses never reopen. We do not want that here in western North Carolina, and we can take action to prevent that." The budget request falls under different categories, and they include the following: $150 million across 2 grant programs for businesses that suffered physical or significant economic loss, $30 million for grants to small towns and counties to rebuild downtowns and other business districts, $150 million for a Helene home construction and repair program. That would start the estimated rebuilding of some 5,000 plus homes that need to be rebuilt after Helene. $25 million to support people struggling to afford rent, mortgages, or utility costs because their home or livelihood was severely or significantly affected. And then in repairing infrastructure, $75 million to repair private roads and bridges, $10 million to provide backup power for emergency operations and other critical infrastructure. And then there's a couple of different categories and sections about supporting farming and farmers, including $100 million to help farmers clear debris and repair their land and waterways so that they can resume production and farming and protect against future flooding. You can read the full detail on everything and the full list that the governor is requesting over at carolinajournal.com. We'll also talk some additional details with Theresa Opeka from carolinajournal.com. Coming up here in about 30 minutes, she'll join us to provide some additional details as the General Assembly is back in Raleigh over the next couple of weeks. We'll see if they get moving on this. We'll continue to track it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:09, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. You've heard some national discussion over the last couple of months from President Donald Trump about no tax on tips or overtime, and there's some movement on that here in North Carolina. To get some details this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome Brianna Kraemer, carolinajournal.com, back to the News Hour this morning. The legislature is now in full session, Brianna, for the next couple of months through about maybe late summer. We're learning some details this morning on no tax on tips or overtime. What's going on here in North Carolina?
Hey, Nick. Yes, that's right. State legislators are now introducing brand new bills in the House. And so they've introduced a couple different tax relief bills. That's something that Republicans have continued to push, is more economic prosperity kind of legislation and tax reductions. And so one of the bills that was introduced last week is similar to what Trump has been speaking on, and that's no taxes on tips and overtime. So this proposed bill would eliminate that, as well as any taxes on bonus compensation. And so, as I mentioned, it aligns with President Trump's efforts at the national level, and it's something that state legislators are now working on here in North Carolina and hope to get across the finish line in the coming months as they get underway with their new legislative session.
And folks will be dealing with this over the next couple of months as their W-2s and 1099s roll into their mailboxes and they get everything ready for tax season. And we're talking about two different things here, right? Trump's talking about this at the federal level for your federal income tax. The state of North Carolina would have no control over that. So we're talking about state income tax here and getting rid of that tax and overtime here in the state.
Yeah, that's right. It's at the state level. So I was able to speak with some state legislators that are behind this bill, and they said that it doesn't really make any sense why we have a tax on tips, because really tips should not be classified as compensation because it's gratuity. And so that is why some of them are behind this and pushing for it. In North Carolina, there's about 555,000 service sector jobs in North Carolina. So all of those people, or at least, a significant amount, rely on tips for their everyday job and for their income. And so, it would just be a nice thing for a ton of workers here to not have to rely on, or rather to be impacted by all of these taxes that is getting taken away in their tips.
Now, this obviously, as you just noted, would be good for the workers that wouldn't have to pay on this. From the state standpoint, presumably that would mean less revenue collected each year through taxes. Do lawmakers have any idea as to would they be able to make up this revenue? How would that work?
Yeah, I did ask them that. They weren't exactly sure on the number yet, but of course that would have an impact on the state revenue. But that's something that will have to go to Finance Committee, and they will have to do a little bit more digging into that and just how they would make that up if needed. Of course, we do have a surplus here also of funds. So I think that's something they still need to look more into on if that would really be that significant in the long run at all. But one interesting thing that was pointed out is that this could also change people's behaviors a little bit. And one example that was given is that certain service workers could lower the price they charge for their services and instead collect much more in tips in order to avoid the tax. So HR departments could get creative in classifying overtime hours in order to avoid taxes. So just an interesting perspective on what could actually happen if we do away with taxes on tips and how that could cause businesses to change their operations and their employees.
We'll, of course, be keeping an eye on that as it makes its way through the legislature over the next couple of months. Looks like another piece of legislation introduced deals with property tax and senior citizens. What are you learning on that?
Yeah, so this proposed legislation is actually going to be coming out sometime this week, and it would be a property tax exclusion to provide tax relief for elderly and disabled homeowners in North Carolina. So this is spearheaded by Representative Aaron Perret of Wake County, and the proposal would offer a 50% exemption on property taxes for North Carolinians over the age of 65 who have lived in their home for over 15 years. So really this comes down to the issue of property values skyrocketing and older people living in their house for a very long time, buying their house when it was worth way less than it is today, and now having to keep up with paying their property taxes. And some of them can't just afford it with the value of their house today. So that would allow elderly people to cut in half the amount of property taxes that would be owed. And that's if their household earning is 70% of the average median income. So really it would just be addressing people that have been in a home for a very long time.
Well, and the interesting thing to note about this, and it's more of a prominent issue in our more metropolitan areas and cities, and we've seen the horror stories online before, Brianna, of people saying, I literally got taxed out of my home. Whatever sort of pension or retirement checks that some of these older individuals are getting can't keep up with the property reevaluations that are happening every 2, 4, 6 years in a lot of these major cities. And it's no joke. They literally can't afford the taxes on it, and they have no choice but to sell and move somewhere else because they can't make that tax bill every year.
Exactly. And that's what Representative Perret said to me when we were speaking about this issue. She said seniors that are living on a fixed income are getting pushed out of their homes. And so they just can't afford to live in their home anymore. And so really this is going to provide additional relief for low income seniors.
We'll continue the conversation on some new legislation being introduced with Brianna Kraemer coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:15, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We'll get a look at traffic on this Tuesday morning, an update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. Good.
It's 521. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. The North Carolina State Board of Elections, alongside Democratic Supreme Court candidate Allison Riggs, are now opposing Republican candidate Jefferson Griffin's attempt to dismiss a federal appeal related to Griffin's ongoing ballot challenge. The election board and Riggs met with the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals at 3 p.m. yesterday to respond to Griffin's motion to dismiss the appeals. Griffin filed that motion on Friday, 4 days after the 4th Circuit panel heard oral arguments in the case. As you're aware, Griffin is the petitioner in the lawsuit against the election board, and he hopes to force the board to throw out as many as 65,000 ballots from his election against Riggs, where he currently trails by 734 votes. The state Supreme Court has rejected Griffin's request for a writ of prohibition in the case. However, the Supreme Court justices maintained a stay, meaning they have blocked the State Board of Elections from moving forward and certifying the current election results. And this is the reason why now we're talking about some various court movings elsewhere, including a state Superior Court hearing, which is scheduled to take place this Friday in Raleigh. The election board lawyers wrote Monday afternoon in the 4th U.S. Circuit, quote, "This appeal is not moot. Petitioner, a.k.a. Griffin, is correct that the North Carolina Supreme Court's January the 22nd order dismissed his petition for a writ of prohibition. But the petitioner proceeds as if this were all the relief that the state Supreme Court ordered. To the contrary, the state Supreme Court not only dismissed the petition, but also maintained a stay of certification of the election, a stay that the court originally entered on January the 7th in this case, and that the court is continuing to enforce pursuant to its exercise of jurisdiction in this case. The parties, moreover, dispute this stay. They have a legal interest in its outcome because revolving around this appeal is the board's favor would have a, quote, practical effect on the outcome of this matter. The State Board of Election and Riggs both want the case returned to a federal district court. That would likely be the likes of Richard Myers, who originally sent it to state court. As we have talked about over the last couple of months now, there are a lot of moving parts. We are getting more details by the week. And again, the big update this week is a Superior Court hearing in Wake County that will take place on Friday. We'll await some of the details from that and await a decision from the 4th U.S. Circuit to see if they have anything to say about it, and keep a very close eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 524, News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Continuing our discussion this morning with Brianna Kraemer, CarolinaJournal.com, on some new pieces of legislation that are being introduced in the first couple of weeks of the General Assembly's 2025 long session. Brianna, we are closely approaching the year anniversary of legalized sports gambling here in the state of North Carolina. Most folks are doing that legally via a cell phone or a laptop, and that's generated a whole bunch of revenue for the state. However, this could have an issue again come tax time, because you actually have to pay taxes on what you win, regardless of how much you lost.
Yes, that's right. And so there is a new bill that's been introduced, another one by Representative Perret, actually. And this one seeks to correct an inconsistency in North Carolina's tax laws related to gambling losses. So what's really interesting is that if somebody bets $1,000 but only wins $500, they end up having to still file taxes on that. And really, that shouldn't be the case, because $500 is so-called winnings, but it's actually not, because it's a net loss or a net zero in reality. So under current state law, gamblers are required to pay taxes on their winnings without deducting the losses. And that's really what this comes down to, is, factoring in the net income, or the net zero or negative, really figuring out exactly if somebody's ahead or behind, and not requiring them to pay taxes when they really aren't coming out ahead.
And, that used to be the case in North Carolina. I don't remember exactly how long ago. I want to say 15 or 20 years ago, you used to be able to deduct some of those losses. The law changed, and it seems like Representative Prey now trying to change some of that back. I would suspect, Brian, over the next couple of weeks, as individuals are preparing their tax filings, a lot of individuals are probably going to be shocked as to how much more they may owe, depending on how much they partook in sports betting, which, whether folks like it or not, has generated millions of dollars in terms of state revenue thus far. A lot of folks are doing it.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's that time of year now. And so people are going to start getting that in the mail, and then they realize it maybe a year later, they forgot maybe what they spent money on or gambled on a year ago. And now it's time to pay back the state or the federal government what they owe. So really, it's interesting because federal law allows gamblers to deduct the loss capped at what an individual actually won. And so that's still what this is getting at, because state law does not currently allow that.
There's some other legislation that is being talked about or has already been introduced. One of them, again, tracking with kind of the national discussion, daylight savings time. A lot of people love it. A lot of folks hate it. What's going on here in North Carolina with that?
Yeah, so that was a different bill introduced as well, observing standard time all year. And so that could move forward in the House this year. I believe it does have bipartisan support behind it. And that would just be getting rid of the back and forth daylight savings time switch that we do throughout the year. But that would be very interesting for North Carolina to be the only state in the whole region to be following that. In Arizona, they don't observe it, and they end up being the only state really around that area to kind of switch between time zones throughout the year. So sometimes be on West Coast time and then sometimes mountain time. And so it would be interesting if North Carolina did the same thing, although I'm not exactly sure if legislators will fully agree to do that, because that could cause difficulties, when you're thinking about our surrounding states, our neighboring states. But that's just one bill that was introduced, could produce some action in the coming months ahead. A different one is constitutional carry, and that's a big one that certain Republicans are very, very for, and then certain Republicans are also on the fence about that one. And so constitutional or permitless carry is something that we expect to see some action on in both the House and Senate this session.
Now, the timeline for all this, you're bringing up this morning that these bills are being just introduced. We saw that the legislature has only been back a couple of weeks. They're expected to be in session at least through the end of June. So just because these bills have been introduced, we don't necessarily know timeline-wise how quickly some of these are to move and potentially make their way to Governor Stein's desk for a signature. There's no time limit on any of these, are there?
No, there's no timeline. Right now is the time of year where legislators in the House and Senate are bringing forth their proposals. So probably all legislators are going to have some sort of policy idea or initiative that they are going to bring to the table, file a bill. So that's what we're seeing right now. On the General Assembly's website, you can see a list almost every day of all the bills that are being filed. And then they will get to work on them in committees, reviewing them, questioning them, researching the funding behind them in the coming weeks and months. And then the votes will start to happen within committees, and then we'll see what gets to the House and Senate floor.
Brianna, not only a time for folks to get updates on the few that we dug deeper into this morning, but also that full list is available on the website this morning?
Yes, that's right. Just go to carolinajournal.com and you can read the latest and see what is coming in this legislative session ahead.
It's a great update this morning. Brianna Kraemer from the Carolina Journal joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:29, now 5:30, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get another look at traffic on this Tuesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick. Look.
It's 5:36. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Don't forget, you can catch the show streaming live each and every weekday morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. And you can listen to the show, take it on demand by checking out the podcast. It's available wherever you get your shows. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour, tap the subscribe or follow button, and you'll get a new show delivered to your smartphone or tablet each and every weekday morning. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. Download and subscribe now. As crews yesterday worked to pull the remains of the remaining wreckage of an American Airlines plane and an Army Black Hawk helicopter after that tragic collision last week over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., we are learning more details about some of the victims, including individuals with North Carolina connections. According to a press release issued by the U.S. Army, 28-year-old Captain Rebecca M. Lobach, a UNC Chapel Hill graduate, served as an aviation officer in the 115th Airborne for the Army from July of 2019 to January of 2025. She was assigned to the 12th Aviation Battalion out of Virginia. During her time at Chapel Hill, Lobach was a member of the ROTC and was in the top 20 of cadets nationwide and in the North Carolina Army National Guard. She also served as a White House military social aide during the Biden administration. Her family released the following statement that was sent out via Army communications, quote, "We are devastated by the loss of our beloved Rebecca. She was a bright star in all of our lives. She was kind, generous, brilliant, funny, ambitious, and strong. No one dreamed bigger or worked harder to achieve her goal. She earned certification as a pilot in command after extensive testing by the most senior and experienced pilots in her battalion after more than 450 hours of flight time, according to her family." Lobach's awards included the Army a couple of various Army achievements, including the Army Achievement Medal, the National Defense Service Medal, and the Army Service Ribbon. The family statement continued saying, quote, "Rebecca cared about people, and she extended to individuals the same fearless defense that she gave to the nation." Talked about some of the experience and some of the things that she did. The other two soldiers aboard the Black Hawk Army helicopter have been identified as 39-year-old Chief Warrant Officer Andrew Eves of Maryland and 28-year-old Staff Sergeant Ryan Austin of Georgia. So those were the three individuals on board that U.S. Army helicopter. As you're well aware of the story now, the horrific collision that took place last week just outside of the Reagan National Airport. You can read more details on this story, more quotes from her family by visiting our website this morning, carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:39, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We are learning new details this morning out of Governor Josh Stein's office about Western North Carolina recovery. If you'll remember, yesterday morning we spent some time talking about a new $30 million grant program to help small businesses in the state. However, the governor is requesting more, over $1 billion from the North Carolina General Assembly. To get some details on that, it's my pleasure to welcome Theresa Opeka, carolinajournal.com, to the News Hour this morning. Theresa, do you have a typo in your headline, or is the governor requesting $1 billion from members of the legislature?
Yeah, good morning, Nick. No, that's no typo. That is what he is requesting, over $1 billion. And he said it's immediate funds. They can't wait for the budget to be passed in June, July, hopefully in June, July, right? This is something that needs to be immediately go out the door to help people in Western North Carolina rebuild their lives. He says, they've gone through so much. So yeah, that is definitely not a typo.
Now, we've heard from the past, and we watched this over the last 6 months or so, the General Assembly, through a couple of different bills, has allocated close to or right around $1 billion thus far for hurricane relief in the western half of the state. Has that money already been gone through? What is this extra $1 billion? Where do we stand right now?
Yeah, so I think some of it did get dispersed. And I think the rest of it's supposed to be dispersed at a later date. I mean, depending on where it was going or what conditions the General Assembly had on that money. So this is other money that is I guess, desperately needed, and rightfully so for the people out there. From what Governor Stein said, what it's going to be used is to strengthen the economy, get people back into homes faster, repair the infrastructure, support farmers, fix private roads and bridges, remove debris, and help school children stay at a grade level. Like, he touched on all of this during his press conference yesterday. Like he said, for instance, they want to have people back in safe and warm places to live. That's what he described it as. So 150 million of that 1 billion would go for Helene Home Construction and Repair Program. That's immediately going to start rebuilding the estimated over 5,000 homes that need to be rebuilt after Helene. And also in that same vein, 25 million to support people struggling to afford rent, mortgage, or utility costs because their homes or livelihood was affected. And we've seen the stories, counties still want their property taxes. It's not up to the counties. That's something that would have to be changed in the state legislature. That story has come out. There's all different things going on. Like I said, supporting farmers, getting construction going. So he said, like, it's an immediate need. He wants to get this done.
I think it's fair to say, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a conservative, or a liberal, there is a pretty broad agreed upon idea that the West still needs a lot of help. However, Theresa, I wouldn't also be shocked to learn that members of the General Assembly are a little trigger shy in regards to allocating money like this, $1 billion lump sum, when they have gone through the last couple of years, almost a decade at this point, watching how the state has mismanaged hurricane relief in the eastern half of the state. I have to imagine that may play into some of the back and forth that we're likely to see in the weeks and months to come.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like you said, this is not a political, there shouldn't be any political sides drawn for this. It was a tragedy for everybody out in Western North Carolina. And as you mentioned, for Eastern North Carolina over the past decade, we've been talking about NCORE, now Grow NC for Western North Carolina, but NCORE and their mismanagement of funds, or who knows where the funds went, right? There are so many millions of dollars in the hole, still asking for money. The state legislature had subcommittee hearings last week for both Grow NC and for NCORE. Like, why should we give you any more money? This is for NCORE. Why should we give you any more money? You've mismanaged it. We've given you so much. We're giving you this millions and millions. Like, well, we still need the money. It's like, well, I used to cover those for the last few years before our Brianna Kraemer took over. And it's like, it was wash, rinse, repeat. You're watching the same thing going on and on and on. So it's like, I can understand, hey, we need some money. Well, what are you going to do with it? I guess everybody's hoping this time's going to be different with Western North Carolina, that hopefully with Grow NC, they'll learn some lessons from NCORE and what not to do. And hopefully NCORE will actually learn some lessons now going forward as well with Pryor Gibson, who is now heading NCORE. But yeah, I wouldn't doubt there's going to be some legislators being gun shy about giving any more money at this point.
We probably don't have all of the details yet, but where do we stand on any? Is there any idea of a timeline for this? The governor can request these dollars, as he's done. He doesn't have any authority to demand them. We know that lawmakers are now back in essentially their full capacity for at least the next couple of months. Any idea, Theresa, you follow this stuff pretty closely, when we could see potentially some movement on this from the General Assembly if they want to work with the governor on it?
Yeah, I don't think we have an actual timeline, but I'm imagining that they'll start talking about it as soon as this week, if they're back, when they're back in session. I mean, and like, it's a slippery slope, or it's a delicate balance, right? Because you don't want to give money out, have it being mismanaged, don't know where it's going, keep asking for money. But by the same token, these are people's lives we're dealing with, whether it is on the East Coast or it's in the Western Mountains. People need new homes. They need their, small businesses. As you mentioned yesterday, the previous morning, about the small business grants. People need help. And they need it now. So I guess you just have to wait and see what happens. But yeah, we'll have to keep watching what the General Assembly is going to do on this.
Absolutely. We'll keep a very close eye on it. Great update this morning. Theresa Opeka from Carolina Journal joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:45, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We'll get a look at your Tuesday morning early commute and update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. We're in
Good morning again. It's 5:52. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Keeping an eye on some statewide news this morning. The North Carolina State Board of Elections and Democratic Supreme Court candidate and current Justice Allison Riggs are opposing Republican candidate Jefferson Griffin's attempt to dismiss a federal appeal related to ballot challenges in their very closely contested race, the only race to be not certified in the entire United States from the November the 5th election. Griffin currently trails Riggs by 734 votes and is seeking to have upwards of 65,000 ballots thrown out, claiming that they are, quote, unlawful. The state Supreme Court previously rejected Griffin's request to halt the election certification, but maintained a stay that prevents the board from certifying the victory as it stands right now if it were to be counted in Riggs' favor. The legal battle now centers on whether the case should be heard in state or federal court. The Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals is reviewing whether U.S. District Judge Richard Myers erred in sending the case back to the North Carolina Supreme Court. If the appeals court rules against Griffin, the case could possibly be returned to federal jurisdiction. However, Griffin's camp argues that the case is moot following the state Supreme Court's dismissal of his petition, while Riggs and the election board contend that the court stay keeps this case active. Left-leaning advocacy groups have also filed in support of Riggs. A three-judge appellate panel, which heard oral arguments back on January the 27th, is expected to issue a ruling soon, as Riggs remains the only unconfirmed election winner in the country. With that, we are also learning additional details about a hearing that is scheduled in Wake County on Friday, as the North Carolina Supreme Court took the Griffin and Riggs challenge and sent that to Superior Court. So that hearing is going to be taking place on Friday. We've got multiple different legal avenues and venues in which this case is traveling at the same time. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour and 24/7 on our website, carolinajournal.com. Well, there is a lot of legislation working its way through the North Carolina General Assembly in the first few days of the 2025 long session, and lawmakers have introduced a series of bills that we were talking about earlier this morning. House Bill 11 proposes to eliminate taxes on tips, overtime, and bonus compensation through an income tax deduction. Those efforts, as you are well aware, align pretty squarely with President Donald Trump's campaign promise to eliminate federal taxes on tips. Representative Harry Warren from Rowan County, who introduced the legislation, explained that tips should not be classified as compensation, but rather as gratuity-free from the government tax standpoint. North Carolina has over 550,000 service sector jobs, so this could be a major impact for workers and for state government here in North Carolina. That's one of the pieces of legislation we're keeping an eye on. Another bill expected to be filed in the House this week is a property tax exclusion bill that would be under consideration to provide tax relief for elderly and disabled homeowners across the state. Led by Representative Aaron Perret out of Wake County, the proposal would offer a 50% exemption on property tax for North Carolinians who are over the age of 65 and have lived in their home for at least the last 15 years. The exemption would only apply to households earning up to 70% of the average median income, which in Wake County would be those earning $70,000 a year or less annually, as recent increases in property valuations have made it very unaffordable for specifically seniors that are not working and just receiving various forms of pensions or Social Security to make their property tax bill each and every year. We'll track that. Another piece of legislation being brought forward by Representative Perret is House Bill 14, which seeks to make some changes to the North Carolina tax law as it regards to gambling losses. Right now, under current state law, gamblers are required to pay taxes on their winnings without deducting any losses, even if their net income is zero or in some cases even negative. You can read more on those stories and those various pieces of legislation by visiting our website this morning, carolinajournal.com. That's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you tomorrow morning from 5 to 6 right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.